Since there's not a lot of mainstream horror out right now in theaters, and per my doctor's orders, I must watch horror at all times, I got to see some new independent horrors recently that I think you might be interested in. So let's start binging.
Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go.
First up is an advanced review of The WEEDHACKER Massacre. It recently played at the Golden State Film Festival, and I'll let you know when this will be released for the masses. It's directed by Jody Stelzig and written by Ray Spivey. Willy Wonder, played by David Trevino, is an up-and-coming actor and in possession of a wicked mullet. When he travels to Red Eye, Texas with a cadre of groupies in tow to catch a music festival, Willie and the gals find themselves in the middle of a mass slaughter. The town believes the killer to be Pokerface, played by Sean Reyna, a misunderstood man-monster who totes around a weed hacker as his main instrument of death. But in fact, it was the villainous Gunther family who did the dirty deed. Though believed dead, Willie's mullet stops a bullet, but he walks away with amnesia and is taken care by Pokerface, who befriends him and keeps him alive with roadkill and lots of card games. Meanwhile, the rest of the county has built a false story that it was Willie himself who killed the co-eds since his body was never recovered. 10 years after the massacre, a movie crew with the only survivor of the massacre arrive in town to film an adaptation of that fateful night. Will Willie remember what happened that night? Will he ever be able to clear his name and identify the real killers? These are the questions answered in this horror spoof, The WEEDHACKER Massacre. Now, The WEEDHACKER Massacre is a very low-budget DIY horror film. It's put together with a lick and a promise. The film does manage to pull off quite a bit with very little, involving flashbacks, origin stories, and a commentary on the movie-making business that often swoops into small towns with promises of fame and glory, only to suck it dry for a studio's sole benefit. If you've ever worked behind the scenes on a low-budget movie, like I have, you're going to recognize a lot of the background games filmmakers play in order to get their movie made. While it's all done on the budgetary low, The WEEDHACKER Massacre is able to capture those hard truths very well. The comedy works occasionally. A lot of it falls in the category of weed humor, where simply talking about weed makes weed smokers giggle. I chuckled a time or two, more at the Hollywood shady behavior than the more slapstick and weed stuff. If I were to compare the humor of The WEEDHACKER Massacre to anything else, it would be to Cannibal the Musical, a lo-fi film that I hold in very high regard. In that film, there is a lot of humor that lands with a thud, but there is an attitude that shines through and shows a lot of promise. Maybe it's because lead David Trevino looks a little like Trey Parker in a bad wig, but for some reason, Cannibal the Musical came to mind as I was watching The WEEDHACKER Massacre. Both films seem to be right on the level in terms of the old chuckle meter. This isn't a laugh a minute, but I did like the bulletproof mullet gag, and the tuft of hair that becomes his friend is quite gross, but funny. The acting, not so top-notch. While there are a few deadpan deliveries, there's a lot of overacting, which oftentimes is just as bad. David Trevino is the best of the bunch as Willy Wonder, with Bobby Grace giving a decent performance as the director of the film within the film. She looks a lot like Katie Sackhoff, which is very nice. Shrewd Texas Chainsaw Massacre fans will recognize Alan Danziger as Sheriff Dancing Shoes. Get it? Dancing Shoes. Yep, it's that type of humor, folks. It seems like the folks behind The WEEDHACKER Massacre had some fun making it, and I hope they did. If you like weed humor, or just are looking for something made by fans in a do-it-yourself type of way that was common in the late 80s when everyone wanted to make a horror movie, The WEEDHACKER Massacre fits the bill. The gore is competent, something that's always surprisingly good in these types of films, but the rest of the film is not going to be for anyone but die-hard, low-budget horror fans. Butcher's Bluff is new on demand and digital download from Breaking Glass Pictures. It's directed by William Instone and Matt Rifley, and written by William Instone and Renfield Rasputin. That's one hell of a name. For ages, an urban legend known only as the Hog Man has terrorized any who dare enter the area of Texas known as Butcher's Bluff. When a team of influencers who run a site focusing on urban legends get wind of the Hog Man, they jump at the opportunity to investigate. Turns out the legend is true, and the entire team is now being stalked by the pig-masked killer. Butcher's Bluff, which doesn't have an apostrophe in the name, and that annoys me, starts out very typically as one of the London brothers, I believe it's Jeremy, and some gal who agreed to be filmed topless are murdered by the pig-masked killer known as the Hog Man. It's an opening that we've seen many times before, and while there is technically not anything wrong with it, there really isn't anything that makes it stand out either. Turns out that pretty much sums up my thoughts on the entire movie. Butcher's Bluff isn't anything too offensive, nor is it bloodless. This is just an attempt to recreate the lightning in a bottle that was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the umpteenth time. The gritty opening montage shows the Hog Man murdering various people and then going back to his grimy lair and fiddling at his work desk. Again, it's a scene we've all seen done better in many a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. The acting isn't bad. I've definitely seen worse, but again, there's no real standouts, save for the always fun Bill Oberst Jr., who plays the part of the cook-like character who maintains the myth of the Hog Man, keeps the police at a distance, and keeps the lights on and pays the bills because, well, Hog Man just doesn't have the social skills or sense of responsibility to do so. Oberst is one of the few great working actors in low-budget movies today. Rather than riding on star power of the past, like many stunt casting out there in this type of movie, Oberst always tries to make his characters unique and memorable, and does so here as well. He's the best part of the movie, as usual. The gore is okay, and yes, the Hog Man is quite brutal with his prey. The only thing that stands out here is that the film also has a peeping Tom midget played creepily by Eric Weeder, and that's pretty cool, too, I guess. I was just looking for something that sets this Texas Chainsaw Massacre ripoff apart from the rest, and this film really didn't do it. Butcher's Bluff had plenty of time to distinguish itself, since the runtime was 2 freaking hours. That's way too long for a slasher movie, in my opinion. They try to make some lore and distinguish Hogman from the 1,000,001 other pig-headed killers out there, knowing damn well there's no one that's going to beat Farmer Vincent from Motel Hell. But they try their darndest anyway. So hey, if you're looking for a typical middle-of-the-road slasher flick with a decent enough-looking pig-masked killer that you'll most likely forget not long after viewing, then Butcher's Bluff is it. It's the one that's got the creepy midget, and of course Bill Oberst Jr., which does give it an advantage over most of its ilk. The Forest Hills is streaming on Tubi. It's directed and written by Scott Goldberg. Rico, played by Chico Mendez, has suffered from severe mental illness for a very long time. But when his mother, played by Shelley Duvall, is diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and dies, what little sanity Rico had slid right off the cracker. Alternating between believing werewolves exist and that he himself is a werewolf, Rico reaches out for help, but ends up lashing out and savagely murdering everyone he comes into contact with. Or at least, that's what he believes. The Forest Hills is one messy little movie. It reminds me a bit of such stream of consciousness films as St. Bernard, Brain Dead, and The Evil Within, where the filmmaker is able to capture that ethereal madness through image and sound and somehow edit it all together to make a slightly nonsensical, yet still poignant little movie about mental illness. Writer-director Scott Goldberg seems to know a thing or two about the struggles of the mentally ill and is able to make this movie watchable because he never forgets to highlight the humanity of Rico, no matter what horrors he may do to others. Rico reaches out for help over and over, attempting to find someone to listen to him, but at the same time, the film also shows Rico as a selfish and irresponsible man who fails to take his medications, relies on others instead of looking to himself for strength and support, and simply takes what he wants, when he wants, only stopping to reflect on that after the damage is done. It's great that Rico feels bad for the horrors he causes, but it's a little too little and a little too late in most cases here. Therein lies the depth of The Forest Hills, as it doesn't simply label Rico as a good or bad man, but a flawed one attempting to make it through an equally flawed society. In that sense, it shares a lot of the same themes as the first Joker movie. What makes The Forest Hills so unnerving is not only Chico Mendez's portrayal of this mentally ill man, but that we are led into his brain pan and made privy to the sights, sounds, colors, and nightmares he experiences. Told in a somewhat non-linear format, we're shown snippets of future events along with flashbacks, all rapidly edited in a strobe light staccato that's going to mess with the viewer's mind as the imagery, sound, and context is not always made completely clear. You're with Rico in what seems to be a quiet, intimate moment, and then he's screaming and covered in blood a few seconds later. This is a movie that doesn't let the viewer settle for more than a few moments before it upends reality and throws more madness in your face. The Forest Hill hosts a whole murderer's row of C to Z list talent, basically the folks you're going to see at any given horror convention, like T2's Edward Furlong, Halloween 3's Stacey Nelkin, Horror Queen Dee Wallace, and Sleepaway Camp's Felissa Rose. All of them are given meatier roles than they usually play, but the real treat was to see Shelley Duvall in her very last role. Yes, this is a role that's not very flattering, as Duvall was definitely not well during the filming of this movie. Her character is quite repulsive, playing a reclusive and abusive mother, yet Duvall still manages to deliver a lively and heartfelt performance that reminds you of the acting powerhouse she once was. One of the things that got old fast and unfortunately lasts for most of the movie is that everyone here seems to have gone to the shouty school of acting. Everyone in this film is amped up and psychotic, screaming every line and overperforming for the cheap seats. This is no subtle movie, but it does convey the point that mental illness is a constant and terrible struggle that can wear at one's soul and sanity. It makes you think that if this is grating on your nerves for just an hour and a half, you can imagine how devastating living that loud and chaotic life all of the time would be. Now, all of this doesn't make for the most pleasant of watches. The Forest Hills is choppy, and while it does tell a straightforward story, it doesn't always take the shortest route to get there. The stream of consciousness style is going to turn off literal-minded folks, but if you are able to withstand the inundation of violence, gore, and madness, there's a pretty poignant movie in there somewhere. The Forest Hills may not be a fun watch, but I think it is a strong representation of sheer insanity. If that type of trip into an unwell mind interests you, then The Forest Hills is going to be your type of descent into madness. Starve Acre is new, streaming on Shudder. It's directed by Daniel Kokotajlo and written by Daniel Kokotajlo from a book by Andrew Michael Hurley. When their son Owen, played by Arthur Shaw, begins showing strange and violent behavior, Richard and Juliet, played by Matt Smith and Morfydd Clark, seek out answers to Owen's unique medical condition. But when tragedy strikes, the parents are overcome with grief and guilt, feelings that are appeased by a new strange discovery on their property Richard unearths in the form of a large skeleton of a rabbit. Starve Acre is not for those who like their stories punchy and action-packed. It's a somber piece of folk horror, focusing on enveloping the viewer in a dank and dark sense of dread and sorrow. Its slow pace matches the depressed moments of the cast, who are dealing with problems no one would want to bear. The characters are literally weighed down by sorrow and loss, making it a very difficult slog to tread through. The thing is, this is a masterful dissection of grief and loss, with a pair of stars that are mesmerizing in their depression due to a tragic death occurring in their family. Both Matt Smith and Morfydd Clark deliver memorable performances as grieving parents, attempting to make sense of the difficulties they experience as parents of Owen, a problematic child who performs some truly disturbing acts. None of this is fun stuff to go through, and I can understand if you're not interested in experiencing the extreme dread and choose to skip this flick. But if you do, you miss some fantastic performances from Smith and Clark, both of which deal with the horrors of parenting a problematic child in different yet still tragic ways. As the story proceeds and Richard and Juliet are forced to accept their fates, it's all the more horrifying to see the breaking of their spirits and embrace of the truly uncanny in order to cope with these complex feelings. I'm being deliberately vague, as I feel the bulk of the first half of the story deserves to play out, especially since the second, more surreal and bizarre half drives the point home so succinctly and metaphorically potent. The final act of Starve Acre simply grips the heart and refuses to let go, as the parents attempt to grasp onto anything that might resemble some kind of normal form of parenthood, no matter how strange that attempt to cope truly is. Though it takes its sweet-ass time, Starve Acre actually treads through all of this grief and gets to a more supernatural level, and once that occurs, there are some sights and sounds that you will most likely not forget. The rabbit that appears to Richard and Juliet looks fantastic, though I believe it is CGI. Still, it's seamless, and while the rabbit's role is something that is truly out there, it looks fantastic and serves as the focal point for some of the film's most powerful scenes. It all culminates in a dark and twisted final scene that needs to be experienced to be believed. I don't want to say any more, but man, those final moments are stuck in my brain, and I doubt they're going to leave anytime soon. Matt Smith, though morose and distant, is great as Richard, a father who tries hard to care despite his own past filled with abuse and torment. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power's Morfydd Clark also has a powerful presence as a mother who has lost it all and will cling to anything, no matter how strange, to overcome these feelings. I also have to give a shout out to Gotham actress Erin Richards, who delivers a strong performance as Juliet's sister who attempts to help out during these hard times. All involved deliver strong performances, enveloping the viewer in this grief and hardship. Again, this is not a chipper little horror flick. It's a morose examination of loss, grief, and coping mechanisms within all of us we rely on in order to keep on keeping on after a severe loss. Starvacre is a slow burn. It slogs along as if it were stuck in hip-deep mud at times, but all of it has a point in forcing the viewer to experience the same feelings of depression and woe that the lead characters are experiencing. It's got a hammer punch of an ending that makes the slow trip there worthwhile, but I can understand if there are those who might not be up to this dark, dank journey. Well, there's a couple indie horror movies for you to chew on. Let me know if you've seen any of these or plan to down in the comments. Please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're